guys, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are going to be talking about dahlias. I finally got mine planted. We're here in zone 8B. So it's finally time for us here in the Pacific Northwest to get our dahlias planted. So I did that over the weekend and I have some clips and we're gonna talk through what I've done, and then I thought I would use this video to just go over the basics. So many of you are growing dahlias for the first time this year and it makes me so happy. Like, first of all, congratulations on becoming a dahlia mommy and daddy. I think that's so fun. Dahlias are one of those flowers that once you grow them, it's hard to stop because they're like that it flower. They're never gonna go away. There's so many varieties. There's so many things, you know, you can do to breed new ones, and it's just such a fun flower to grow. And whether you're growing them as a cut flower or in the landscape, if you're looking for something that flowers all season long, then dahlias are definitely something you want to add to your landscape. So today I wanted to go over some basics. Again, I think there's just a lot of information out there about dahlias, so I'm going to try to keep this concise and to the point, because when it comes down to it, it's not rocket science. I mean, they are really simple to grow, but I do want to highlight some key things for you to keep in mind when you are growing them this year. So let's jump right in. I'm going to kind of go over the topics that we are going to cover today, and then we'll go through each one together. So when it comes to dahlias, I do think there are several topics to kind of touch on, and that is going to be soil requirement, light requirement, watering requirement, staking, fertilizing, some insects, kind of pest control, cutting, because a few of you have asked before, where do I cut my dahlias? How should I harvest dahlias and deadheading? So we'll kind of have a little touch on that as well. So let's just jump right into the soil and the light requirement. Dahlias love a lot of light, and the more light you can give them, the more they're going to bloom for you, and it's going to prevent them from growing leggy stems, because with all plants that require a lot of sun, if you put them in an area that's shady or part shade, they tend to look for that light more. So with dahlias, I would recommend they be planted in an area that gets a minimum of 6 to 8 hours. Now, if you live in one of those really warm states like Texas, Arizona, Florida, you can get away with planting them in an area that gets part shade in the afternoon, just because your guys' zones are already so hot that they will be okay to get a little bit of part shade in the afternoon. But I would definitely plant them in a spot where they're at least getting that morning light in those areas. Everywhere else, again, 6 to 8 hours is what we give our dahlias. They actually get quite a bit because the sun rises and sets in a spot where they pretty much get light all day long. However, we just don't reach those really high temperatures that some of you might in Southern California or Texas, etc. In general, dahlias do like to have a well-draining soil. They do not like to sit in water. They don't like wet feet. In our raised beds, we've really used the best quality soil that we can get that doesn't have any herbicides or pesticides, because that can burn your plant. So keep that in mind. If you're buying a raised bed mix, you want to make sure that it doesn't have those herbicides or pesticides in them, because a lot of the times those soils will have that, and it can again burn your dahlia. And they'll also have a lot of fertilizer, especially nitrogen, which dahlias do not really like, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. So when we built our beds, the first layer that we laid down was a sandy loam. And that is because, again, it's going to allow for really great drainage. I've also noticed at one of our local dahlia farms here, Swan Island Dahlias, that their soil is super sandy, and I think that's why their plants do so well. So we went ahead and we did a nice layer of sandy loam, and then we used a premium compost mix that was designed specifically for raised beds. Now, we do buy that in bulk just because we had quite a bit to fill, so it was more economical to do it that way. And every year we amend our beds with a little bit of compost, which dahlias really like. You can also use cow manure. I think just kind of working that into the soil every year is going to give them that extra those extra nutrients that they need. If you're planting dahlias in the landscape, which I do as well, I make sure to amend that soil so it's a little bit more well draining, because we do have clay in our area. And over the last couple of years after buying this house, we've really spent a tremendous amount of time and money to really work the soil to kind of get it to that area where we're not having to amend all of the time. So it does take a little bit of time, but I do recommend, again, if you have clay, add some amendments to it, and I'll pop some up on the screen for you, that to kind of help break that sand, or not that sand, but that clay down a bit more. Now let's talk about watering, which is I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, and it's one of those things that take a little bit of time and practice to get down when it comes to dahlias. A lot of people will water their plants every day for like 10 minutes, but we found, and a lot of farmers also recommend this, to water your dahlias 3 to 4 times a week, but do a nice deep water. And you can accomplish that by like a soaker hose. I did add a little short the other day where you can like drill holes in a bucket if you don't have drip irrigation, and use that to slowly water your plants. We have drip tape in all of our raised beds, which we found works really well. So we do have 7 raised beds where we grow a lot of cut flowers. The dahlia beds get their own zone, so those only get watered about 3 to 4 times a week for about 45 minutes. So again, it's a very slow trickle, but they drink up that water is just so much better than just doing a little bit every day. Now, I will say on really hot days, like it's not very typical for us, but when it gets to like 100 degrees here in Portland, Beaverton area, again, not typical, I will water them a little bit more. I might even hose them down a bit, which I know some people say you shouldn't hose down your plants, but actually I've talked to a lot of farmers and they have done that to help cool them down a bit. Try to find a solution where you can water 3 to 4 times a week and do a deep water, 45 minutes to 60 minutes, just a really slow little trickle. That is really going to make your plants super happy. So let's talk about fertilizing dahlias. To start with, not only do I add compost to my raised beds where I'm planting them, I also give them a little bit of a starter fertilizer. You can also use bone meal, which is what a lot of farms like to use. Dahlias really love bone meal, and again, it's just one of those like amendments for your soil. It's just going to benefit them throughout the whole season, and it's readily available at like most big box stores. You can find it at your local nursery. I'll link some down below for you, but I use a starter fertilizer, which I really like, and I like to use that for most of my plants. If I don't have that, then bone meal is something that I will kind of go to next. Again, we're just kind of giving them everything they need to just kind of get them going, you know, before we let them out into the harsh environment and, you know, Mother Nature. Now, as far as fertilizing them throughout the season, this is something I think people have a misconception that you have to fertilize them weekly, like we do with our annuals, because we want our annuals to perform better and bigger, and we do that by feeding them so often, right? That's not the case with dahlias. Dahlias require maybe a feeding once every 3 to 4 weeks. So really, I kind of do mine like once a month, and I stay on a consistent schedule up until they're done blooming. So for us, dahlias start blooming end of July to October. So by like September, I kind of back off on the fertilizing. But after 30 days or within 30 days of planting our dahlias, I will give them their first feeding. And that's kind of like the rule of thumb that you want to follow. And as far as fertilizers go, I like to use this product called More Blooms. I've talked about it before in other videos. It was something that was recommended to me by a dahlia farmer that's been doing this for, I don't know, over 30 years, and it works. So I just stick to that. I will link it down below for you. But in general, you want to make sure that you're using something with a low nitrogen. You actually want the last 2 numbers, so the phosphorus and potassium, to be higher than the nitrogen. So you can do like a 244 or a 51010. Those numbers are going to dictate like how much of that element is in the fertilizer. And again, in general, you want the nitrogen number to be about half of what the other 2 numbers are. So that's really important. Do not fertilize your dahlias with a high nitrogen based fertilizer, because they will not like that. It's just going to put in a lot of growth, but it's not going to do anything for blooms or anything else like that. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about staking. Staking is one of those things that some people do it, some people don't. Some of the farms that we visit, you've probably have seen that they don't stake, but that's because they plant their dahlias pretty close together, because again, those plants are there for production and they mound them up. I do recommend staking, and I think most farmers and growers will tell you, yes, you should definitely stake. There are many, many ways that you can stake your dahlias. There's not really a wrong way. We've used like the corral method, which I've talked about in another video, which I'll link down below. But as far as your actual stakes, you can use T-posts. We've used bamboo. We've just found the last couple of years the T-posts to be really strong for us, especially late in the season when we get those windstorms. Like you'll definitely be happy that you staked your dahlias, because one gust and they can just whoop, break right at the base because they're very hollow inside. So staking is something that you want to do when you plant your dahlias. I've done it afterwards. However, you always run the risk of like puncturing the tuber that you planted or the clump that you planted. So I've done that before. So I do highly recommend that you put your stakes in first and then do your planting. We usually, for our beds, I think we're going to use about 4 for each run. And I think that will be plenty enough. And then we'll use probably just like twine, which we've used in the past, and then corral them as they start to grow. It's worked for us. Since we've done it this way, we haven't had any incidents of them breaking. And I think especially if you have dahlias that are getting over 3 feet tall, you definitely want to stake them. Those little miniature ones, those are going to be okay. Like, they don't really need to be staked, but just a good rule of thumb, if they're 4 feet or taller, you should definitely stake it. I've seen people use tomato cages. Again, anything that you can get your hands on to stake them is going to work just fine. So now that you have all of these details, let's talk about when you should plant your dahlias. Typically, you want to wait for the soil temperature to get about 60 degrees. That's your safe zone of when your dahlias are not going to rot or freeze. So you can check your soil with a thermometer. Honestly, I know we're past that frost date, and I kind of wait for that frost date, and then I feel safer to go ahead and plant the dahlias. In general, most people will plant them in the northern states around Mother's Day. We planted ours a couple of days ago, and of course it rained the next day, which is not ideal, but they're going to be just fine. I do recommend, if you are planting your dahlias, wait till you have a stretch of dry weather before you get them in the ground, because again, there's always a chance that they might rot because of all of that moisture. They're not actively growing yet, so they're not able to process all of that water at once. So wait till you have a stretch of dry weather before you plant your dahlias. So now you have the dry weather, your soil is about 60 degrees, you've amended your beds or the area that you're going to be planting your dahlias. How do you actually plant them? Planting dahlias is really simple. You want to dig a hole that's about 4 to 6 inches deep and lay down your tubers or clumps horizontally. This is where the growth points are going to come out, and at this point you might be able to spot the eyes. They're like the little tiny growth points where your stalks are going to come out of. So I just lay them down like this, and then I plant them. And I try to lay them down so they're all facing the same direction. If you're planting them in a raised bed or as a production line, that's how I like to do it. So I wouldn't plant one like this and one like this. I want to keep them in a consistent spacing. Typically, you want to give your dahlias about 12 to 18 inches. Some people will say 16 to 18 inches apart. I think 12 to 16 is good. I don't do that, and I don't recommend you do what I do, just because I stay on top of cutting them and keeping them, making sure that they have enough airflow, but I do kind of fudge the numbers a little bit. I will space my dahlias about 8 to 10 inches apart. Again, spacing, it's not a huge issue for me, but I do like to grow a lot of dahlias. I think I got about 200 of them planted the other day, so I do want to kind of put them tightly together. But again, airflow is really important for dahlias, so as long as you're staying on top of pruning them, deadheading them, and then cutting those leaves that are close to the soil that are no longer doing anything, or that sun doesn't really get to, then I think that's okay. But typically I would say stick to that 12-inch spacing just to be on the safe side. One quick call out is that you don't need to heavily water your dahlias after you plant them. You want to make sure that they have a little bit of time to acclimate and start growing before you start watering them on a regular basis. Unless your soil is bone dry, don't worry about watering them in. Like, our soil was kind of moist from the rains from previous days, so we didn't water them in. However, it did rain the following day. which it only lasted for a couple of hours, so I think we're okay. But I did want to say a lot of people make the mistake, because this is what we do when we plant something new. We really water them in, but you don't have to do that with dahlias. Just wait until they're ready to, or they're starting to put on growth. Unless your soil is super, super dry, then you want to kind of give them a little bit of moisture to get them going. After you plant your dahlias, go ahead and put down some slug bait, because they love those little tender new growths. Sometimes you forget you plant them and you see them that they're coming, they're growing, you're excited, but then you forget about the slugs. But the slugs don't forget about your plants. Sluggo, again, just a hot little tip for you to remember to do when you plant your dahlias. Since we're on the topic of pests and insects, there are a few that most people have issues with in their garden when growing dahlias. That's going to be slugs, earwigs, cucumber beetles. I have an issue with aphids, and there's also an issue which we haven't had yet, but I know a lot of people have this issue with, and that's going to be with spider mites. So for that, I am going to list a few products in the description box for you to consider buying and get on a regular spraying routine. We don't love to use chemicals or anything like that in our garden. Even with our cut flowers, we try to use organic based products, but even organic things aren't always like the best. But for us, I think, again, aphids is something that we have an issue with. So I try to stay on top of spraying something called Rose RX. It's something that's worked for us for, I don't know, for years now, and it's an easy product to use. I just spray them early morning or late in the evening. It's not going to damage any or harm any of the beneficial insects. So that's one product that I really like, but there's so many out there. I will list a few for you to consider. I know as far as beetles go, I know that's a huge problem for a lot of you. We always get questions on how do we get our dahlias to look so pretty and clean and like there's no bugs on them. We just don't have an issue with the beetles, and that's really it. I feel bad because I know a lot of you have that problem, but one of the things that a lot of farmers will do is use organza bags, but if you're growing a lot, I know that can be really time consuming. So I would say try to stay like on top of, you know, getting rid of those. You can just flick them into a little bucket of soap and water to kill them. That's something that you just kind of have to stay on top of and do every day so they don't accumulate and then get overwhelming, and then, you know, your plants are just going kaput because the beetles are getting to them before you are. Something to keep in mind, it does take a little bit of time and effort to keep them looking beautiful, but it's totally worth it in the end. Now, as far as getting more blooms and flowers, we've talked about this in a separate video, but the number one thing that you can do is deadhead and cut your flowers. So many people leave their blooms on for as long as, you know, until they're like brown and icky, which is fine if you want to enjoy that full cycle of the bloom. But after a few days of blooming, I typically harvest mine pretty quickly. There are some that I just leave because I love to watch them, and if they blow out where that means like the center just comes out, the bees really enjoy that, so I'll leave them on there. But if you want more blooms, you want to make sure that you're cutting and you're deadheading your flowers. That goes for any flower. Don't be afraid to do this. I know it could be like so scary, but you got to do it. And speaking of deadheading, let's talk about pinching or topping off your dahlia, which you should do once they get about 12 to 18 inches. You want to cut down about 2 or 3 sets of leaves, and you just want to top them off. I have a video on that. I'll link it down below. It's scary because you're sacrificing that very first bloom that you're probably so excited to see. But what that is going to do is trigger your plant to send off more shoots. So you're going to get a bigger, more robust plant, and in turn, you're going to get more blooms. So it's one of those like trade-offs. Yes, you lose that first bloom, but you end up getting so many more after that. So definitely I recommend pinching or topping off your dahlias. I did receive a comment about where to cut your dahlias. In general, I like to cut them about 12 inches, which when they're that long, you probably have a lot of little side buds that aren't bloomed yet, but you want to cut deep in order to trigger your plant to produce more blooms, which I know it's like, why would you sacrifice so many? But you don't want to cut a flower that's about 6 inches. Like that's not really going to do much for you. So again, cut them about like 12 inches in length. I know that's pretty long, but trust me, it's going to be great for your plants, and in turn you're just going to get more shoots coming out and more branching, and you're gonna have like an endless amount of flowers by doing these things. So just a few more things to keep in mind as we wrap up this video. I know a lot of you like to grow flowers in pots, and dahlias can definitely be grown in containers. In fact, I'm probably gonna grow some in containers this year. You can do that. They're going to do just fine. I recommend you choosing a variety that doesn't get over 4 to 5 feet tall, just because it's going to be a little bit harder to stabilize them in containers. However, I would use something like a tomato cage in that case to just give them support all the way up, so they're not like, waving or toppling over in the wind. But yes, you can definitely grow them in containers. I would say to up your fertilizing to maybe every other week, just because when they're in a container, every time you water them, you're going to wash away a lot of those nutrients. So go ahead and make sure that you're fertilizing them a little bit more, and make sure you're using potting soil and not garden soil in your containers. Again, they don't like wet feet. They want something that's going to drain really well. So yes, go for it. If you want to grow in containers, do it. Just make sure you keep in mind those little tips. Another thing is, dahlias usually take about 75 to 90 days to bloom, which is a long time, but they do bloom all the way until the frost, which is again one of those trade-offs. If you're looking for fall interest or fall flowers to bring inside or make arrangements or to sell flowers, then definitely dahlias are a perfect contender for that. And as far as different varieties, we've done a detailed video about this because so many people ask about the different types of dahlias or what my favorite dahlias are. Of course, I have favorites. It's hard to have a favorite, but there's a list that I change every year, but there's a few that always make it to my top 5. So I'll link down that video below. But the cool thing about dahlias is there's so many varieties, so many colors. I don't think there isn't, I think there's a flower for everybody out there. There isn't one. I haven't met somebody that's like, no, I just think they're ugly flowers, just because there's so many shapes, sizes. Like, how can you not find one that you like? So many, the possibilities are almost endless when it comes to dahlias. So check out that video if you want to learn specifically about different varieties and different types of dahlias. And as far as tubers grow, so many people also ask, why are my tubers long and skinny? Why are my tubers chunky and short? In general, dahlias are like people. Every one of them is different. They come in all shapes and sizes. And it doesn't mean that if you have a tiny little tuber or a long skinny one that they're not going to bloom. Different dahlias produce different types of tubers. So some of our biggest dahlias actually have the tiniest little tuber, and you think there's no way it's going to produce this 10-inch big flower, but it does, and it's so wild to me. Like, till this day, I'm just like, how? But it don't worry about size, doesn't matter. We did a little reel about that too. It really doesn't matter. So don't worry about if you're getting tiny little ones, as long as they have their body, the neck, and the growth point, which we've talked about in different videos. They're going to do just fine. Don't judge them by their look or their size. They're going to do beautiful for you, I promise. All right, I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully this is a good guide for you to refer back to. You can save this video. If it was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions, or maybe do like a Q&A on just dahlias. Anytime I don't have an answer, I do have a really good relationship with a few farmers, so I can always go to them and ask them if I can't answer it myself. But yeah, that's it for today. We can talk about dahlias as often as you want. You know me, anybody talks about dahlias, I'm like, what did you say? How can I help you? So I always insert myself in those conversations. But if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.